eagles soaring over the cliffs and headlands. I'm really looking forward to a nice quiet rest, she said to herself. Her guest house was very comfortable and so close to the sea that she could smell the clean, salty air whenever she opened her window. This is the life, she thought, nice and peaceful says the princess has promised to share her dinner with him. Is this true? Demanded the king, turning to the princess and looking rather angry. Yes, it is, said the princess in a small voice, and she told her father the whole story. When a promise is made, it must be kept, my girl, said the king, so you must ask the frog to dine with you. Presently, the frog hopped into the great hall and round to where the princess was sitting. With a great leap, he was up on the table beside her. She stifled a scream. You promised to let me eat from your golden plate, said the frog, tucking into the princess's food. The princess felt quite sick and pushed the plate away from her. Then, to her horror, the frog dipped his long It surely can't need oiling again. He stopped running and got off the wheel, but the squeak continued. Harry sat quite still on his haunches and listened intently. Then he realised the door to his cage was squeaking. The door was flapping open. The little girl had not closed it properly before she went to bed. Harry did a little dance of glee. Then he went to the door and looked cautiously out in case there was any danger, but all seemed to be well. The cat was asleep on a chair. The dog was sleeping soundly on the floor. Now, as well as being a greedy hamster, Harry was also clever. Once outside the cage, the first thing he did was look at the catch to see how it worked. Yes, he was pretty sure he could work out how to open it from the inside now. Harry sniffed the air. There were some tasty tidbits left over from a birthday party on the table. He could smell the sugar icing, and soon he was on the table, cramming his mouth with the odds and ends of cheese sandwiches and pieces of chocolate cake. When he had eaten his fill, he stuffed his cheek pouches with ginger biscuits and ran back into his cage, closing the door behind him. Good, thought Harry. Now I will never be hungry again. The next night, Harry let himself out of his cage and helped himself to food, and again the next night, and the night after that. He feasted on everything and anything. Nuts, bananas, pieces of bread, leftover jelly, and slices of pizza were all pushed into his greedy mouth. Each time he returned to his cage, he filled his cheeks with more and more food. He did not notice that he was getting fatter and fatter, although he was aware that he could no longer run round in his wheel without falling off. Then one night he undid the door catch, but found he was simply too wide to get through the door. For a while Harry sat in a very bad temper in the corner of the cage. His cheeks were still bulging with food from his last midnight feast, but the greedy hamster wanted more. Then he had an idea. I'll get the lazy cat to help, he thought. He squealed at the top of his voice until the cat, who had been dreaming of rats, woke up with a start. What do you want? She hissed at Harry. Harry explained his problem. Of course, I'd only be too pleased to help, said the crafty cat, thinking to herself here was an extra dinner. With her strong claws, she bent back the door frame of the cage until there was just enough room for Harry to squeeze through. Then, with a mighty swipe of her paw, she caught him and gobbled him whole. She felt extremely full, what with Harry and all his food inside her. She could barely crawl back to her chair, and as soon as she was fast asleep again and snoring loudly with her mouth open inside her tummy, Harry too felt very uncomfortable. Every time the cat snored, it sounded like a thunderstorm raging around his head. I must get out of here, he thought, and headed for the cat's open jaws, but he was far too fat to get out again. Then he had another idea. Through the cat's jaws, he could see the dog lying on the floor. Help! Help! He squeaked. The dog woke up to a very strange sight. There was the cat lying on the chair snoring, but she also seemed to be squeaking help. The dog put his head on one side. He was very perplexed. Then he saw a pair of beady eyes and some fine whiskers inside the cat's mouth. It was Harry. Get me out of here, please, pleaded Harry. Now the dog did not very much like the cat, so he was quite willing to help the hamster. I'll stick my tail in the cat's mouth, then you hang on while I pull you out, said the dog. But mind you don't make a sound and wake the cat, or she'll surely